Alrighty, folks, we have the man, myth, the legend, aka Mr. Bill Allen, who is pioneering teenage tycoon. And I just heard that he had his kids or folks in the program read The Millionaire Next Door. Folks, that was a book they read like 30 years ago. So I've got to ask, does The Millionaire Next Door still resonate with the younger crowd? How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing good. So to answer that question, I'm not sure. It was we read a book, Swim, which is very much like a fable. It's a story, and then we moved to this book, which is more like a textbook. And so the kids definitely struggled to get through it, no
Okay.
doubt about it. And
Yeah.
I definitely didn't read this when I was in my teens. I read it when I was in my 20s, and it
Yeah.
was like after I was on my like wealth journey. So, but I'll tell you what, the feedback that we got from like what the kids were learning, like understanding the principles and the strategies and those kind of, and the concept, like the overall concept, they hit it out of the park. So there are definitely big words in there. They're struggling to understand some certain sections and areas. But I think, as you probably know, like at different ages and where we are, when we read a book, we get different things out of it. So it's
Mhm.
really cool to watch what they were getting out of it. And it was awesome. So I highly encourage anybody who's listening to this, watching this, to read the book over and over and over again at different
Yeah.
times in their life.
No, The Millionaire Next Door, one of my prized possessions, one of the things that I'm trying to do now, just as a personal goal, is collect autograph books, right?
Mm,
As somebody who's written a book, I know what it takes to write them. So I'm trying to collect autograph books. And one of my most treasured books right now it's signed by William Danko. So I got it signed, it got signed in August 27th of 2020. So this is a great book. There's so much in this, to your point. I have read this probably dozen times and I get different pieces from it. And I still remember Dr. North and Dr. South, right? One doctor is a spender, one is
yeah.
not. And I live that life. So I live in the Silicon Valley. I work with a lot of salespeople, engineers, consultants who make, let's just call it 400 grand a year, certainly more than most. And some people are millionaires, and some people couldn't lend you 5 grand because they live, paycheck to paycheck. So the truths in this book are still valid after 30 years. The numbers are a little bit different and skewed. But I also understand how a teenager might read this and it might feel like a textbook because there's some math involved and some big words and some definitions. Yeah, it's not a story, right? It's more like a research paper, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they basically, if you haven't read the book, they went out and gathered a lot of information from people, people that made a lot of money, people that didn't make as much money, like millionaires. They looked at all the millionaires and said, okay, what do they have in common? And then kind of broke it down. So, I mean, we have some kids that are like 9 and 10 years old that are reading this book right now, which is insane, by the way. Like
Oh, that's insane. That is awesome.
so if you could just imagine if you read that book at 9 or 10, even the little bit that you pick up is something that will fundamentally change the way that you see the world. And
Yeah.
I try to get my 9-year-old to read it. He was having trouble. He's like, Dad, this just isn't the book for me. I was like, all right, buddy, well, you decide. And so he probably read, a third of it or so and just couldn't get through it, which I said, hey, thanks for trying, buddy. We pretty much structured it such that the book club is specifically designed for 6th grade and up. So
Right.
about 11 to 12 years old and up. But we have 8, 10-year-olds that are jumping in and reading this stuff too, which is really cool.
Mm,
And
mm.
I'm giving them an easier book next. So they have an easier book to read next. Um, and so more of a fable
Yeah.
story-esque book as opposed to a textbook. So we'll kind of
Yeah.
alternate back.
Again, I think I understand why it does read more like a research paper. I mean, that's what Thomas Stanley and William Danko, both of their names have PhD
Yeah.
next to it on the byline. So they are both PhDs and hence more like a research paper. But even if you just take the basics, like live below your means, right? That's a key example. And if you got to I think it's the later part of the chapter, Dr. North and Dr. South, that part of the book, Bill, like that was a light bulb moment for me. It's like it's not much how much you make, it's how much you keep.
Yeah.
That that was like lightning in a bottle for me.
Yeah, and one of the biggest ahas in the very beginning of the book, even where it talks about all these millionaires, and then on average, where most of them are just making what you would probably assume to be a somewhat average salary. Like they're not
Yeah.
all making, 500,000, 800,000, $1 million a year. They're making at that time, I think the average was like 130K a year or something. It
Mhm.
might even be under 100 when they wrote
It
that
probably
book.
was under 100. Yeah.
Yeah, it might have been like 90K. And so when you think about that, scale that up to now, it's like, 120, 130, something like that. But they're living below their means, just like you talked about.
Yeah.
And I need to get my wife to read that book. I shouldn't have been pushing that hard for my son. I should have been pushing it for my wife. Um, she goes, we got a Dr. North and Dr. South relationship going together. So
That's funny. The other thing, again, for parents, we did a lot of research on parents who um, pay for some of their adult children's expenses. Right? It talked about how that is actually almost injuring them going forward. And that was because I read that book when Teresa was very young, and
mm.
it was like, ooh, you know, you could do harm by doing what you thought was good.
Yeah, I mean that's like the highest compounding time, right? And you're starting to get to the point where now that money is starting to make a lot more money on itself, and so you start drawing it out, pulling it out of investments and places that it's been working. Like because in the beginning, it's kind of like debt on a house, right? We talk about that all the time. It's all interest in the beginning, and now then it's like massive principal pay down time. Compound interest works the exact same thing. It's like you've been working really hard to get it to that point, and then you start taking money out to pay for college and stuff. That's what my dad said to me. He's like, I'm not paying for your school, dude. Like
Yes,
you
I get
got
you to
you
high
get a
school. It's on
scholarship.
you.
He's like, you're a really good soccer player. Maybe you should try that.
Yeah.
You got this military option. You can get a ROTC scholarship like I did. But my dad and all of his brothers and sisters worked their way through school. Their parents didn't have any money. And so they all did my dad was a co-op student where he'd work one quarter and then go to school for a quarter, then work another quarter and go to school for a quarter. So he'd have to save up for his tuition. And then he got a ROTC scholarship after 2 years. So then he did, Navy ROTC and got a commission in the military. And same thing with me. He just said, hey, these are your options. Start filling out these paperworks, fill out these scholarship applications. That was my job when I was like 17. It was just scholarship
Ah,
applications and sports, like recruiting and stuff, going on these visits. And he did help me with some of the room and board, but it wasn't much. It's just like 5K a semester or something. So
yeah. The other thing I remember from the book that I felt really good about is it normalized wealth to income. Now, what do I mean by that? It basically gave us a formula to say, hey, are you an under accumulator of wealth or are you a prodigious accumulator of wealth? Basically, are you above or below the line? And again, that was one of those light bulb moments for me because again, when I'm coming into this book, I'm probably in my 20s, maybe early 30s. I think the only answer is make a gob of money. And
yeah.
this book really said, no, you could be a teacher making 50 grand a year and be a PAW, which is the acronym. And that was I felt good that was possible. I remember looking at that going, okay, I think this is a good thing.
Yeah, and if anybody's like, what does prodigious mean? I had to look it up before this. It's resembling or benefiting a prodigy. So we all probably know what a prodigy is. It's like
Right.
somebody who's like, overachieving, above and beyond, like a brilliant, really smart, those kind of things you probably think of. So that's what it means. So a PAW is the good one, and then the under accumulator, which we pretty much know under is usually bad, right? So the
Don't do
PAW,
that.
and one thing we did was, at the end of the last book that we read, we had the author come in and speak to the kids, and then at the end of this book, obviously Thomas Stanley passed away,
Mhm.
so we couldn't get him. I'm kind of like looking at bringing on his daughter potentially. The thing with the kids is I'm not sure they have enough like really great questions about this book, other than they understand the concept. We're bringing in a PAW right now to do the event this Thursday. So I was flying down to Dallas last week with somebody who's built a really awesome. Um, she's got a company for virtual assistants, so she helps people find virtual assistants, and she trains them. She hires them and trains them, and puts them and places them in companies. And so I was asking her about her net worth, and we were doing an interview for my YouTube channel in the plane. Which, by the way, you need to come into the plane and do an interview. We'll figure out how to do that next time we're in the same area.
You just
But
hear I hate flying, right? You're going to put me up in this
it's
little
yeah, it's
plane.
going to be perfect. That's going to be the most viral piece of content we could possibly create
You're
together.
going to see Mike Zuber's white ghost.
That's right. That's right. It'd be like that hat. So,
Oh, jeez.
so I,
Okay,
I
fine.
Okay, we can go many places with that one. And so we
I'll
were
do it
flying
because you
together.
asked.
Yeah, you should. You should do it. It'll totally cure your fear of flying. It will like totally cure it. You just be up front. You can be in control. You can land the plane. You can take off. You can pull some G's. You can go inverted if you want. Um, and so I asked her. I said, "Hey, what's your net worth?" And the two of them, they're from Moldova, which is
Okay.
like a small country in outside of Russia, very impoverished country,
Mhm.
low income country. They built their own house there. It's probably worth like $20,000. You can live
Mm.
for like $300 a month easily.
Oh, wow.
It was wild. And they said they were talking back and forth. Her husband was in the back. They had both worked for me in the past. Now they run really successful companies. And he said, I think we are like 350,000. And I said, "Oh, you guys aren't millionaires yet. I thought maybe you'd be millionaires by now." And he's like, "No, no, no, no." And so we did the interview. And after the interview, we spent the day in Dallas and we flew home the next day. And he came to my farmer's market on Saturday and said, "Hey, after our talk, I really started wondering," because I said, "Hey, you guys got to value your business a little bit, some different things that you have, all your assets and liabilities." We talked about that the whole flight home after the
Mm.
interview. And he
Okay.
goes, "Hey, I just wanted you to know that I went and did all the math, and we included like the crypto that we have and all these other things and our house in Moldova and everything, and we have $1.1 million dollars. And we are millionaires. I had no idea." And I was like, he's like, "Thank you for doing that. That exercise was so powerful." And they are basically PAWs, right? This prodigious accumulators of wealth. They're also first generation PAWs. Like nobody in their family has ever been an accumulator of wealth. It's always been like, paycheck to paycheck, almost no net worth at all, which is what most countries like. They just live every single week, every single month. And so if you're not tracking your net worth, this is what we're teaching the kids right now. Like start right now and start figuring out what's the net worth? Like how much do you have? What do you have any debt? What does that look like? And that's something that I did. And when you map it out, the equation that they use for determine if you're a UAW or a PAW is you take your age, you multiply it by your annual income, and then you basically divide by 10 or multiply it by 0.1. And then if you're under that, if your net worth is under that, you're a UAW. If your net worth is over that, you're a PAW. So just like Michael said in the beginning, if you're making $50,000 a year and you're 20 years old, you don't have to have a ton of net worth to say that you're a PAW, right?
Right.
You're
Yeah.
basically an overachiever when it comes to wealth. It means you're saving more than you're spending, and
Yeah.
your net worth is going up. And as you get older, your net worth should go up. And if your income and age goes up, so should your net worth, and it should be on
Yeah.
that scale. Instead, normalizing the scale, which is really cool.
No, I love the formula. And again, it just gave you permission. It gives you a target that you could grow into. Because again, the older you get, typically speaking, you make more money. So the number grows as you grow. But the key to getting wealthy is the same thing. It's owning assets for a decade, right?
Yeah,
You let inflation be your friend. I have a shirt that says, um, I use inflation to get rich. Ask me how. It's just,
that's a good idea.
dude, inflation's a feature, not a bug. It
Yeah.
just is. And I still remember the very first time I read Millionaire Next Door. I think it's in the opening paragraph. There was a phrase, and I'll give it to you, but there was a phrase that still hits home 30 years later and is probably more relevant today than it was 30 years ago. And that is big hat, no cattle.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, that still hits me 30 years later. Think about the world that we live in with social media. It's all hat, no cattle. So what does that mean to you, Bill?
Uh, so all hat, no cattle, basically like somebody who's just faking it. If I got all hat, no cattle, it's all talk, nothing backstage. It's just, two different people. And so, I'd like to be all hat, all cattle. So, it's interesting when you mentioned social media. I've been spending, I've spent the last year focused on that, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, that kind of stuff. And now when I study people, it used to be early on, I would just look at it and be like, "Oh my gosh, they have 750,000 followers, or they have 1 million followers, or they have 300,000 followers." And then I didn't understand the game to know that there's followers and then there's like actual engagement and the
Mhm.
right people and building an audience that, relates to you and watches your stuff and and those kind of things. It's totally different. like we did a video together on YouTube, and so many people came in the comments and like, "Hey, I came over here from Zuber's community. Hey, I'm over from ORAT. Hey, like it was just like you said, hey, go watch this video, and they did.
Hmm.
And that is, I mean, I've seen people that have hundreds of thousands of followers, and they get 1,000 people that watch their videos. It's just you can buy them. There's so many
Mhm.
different ways to get attention these days. So that's it. Like all hat no cattle is really that. Like you've got on the surface, it's a lot of show. It's
It's all
big, big,
flash.
big, but you actually got
It's
nothing behind it.
flash. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not what you want. And again, the other thing in the book that I really resonated with was like PAWs, again, the side that you want to be on versus UAW. It's very simple kind of daily decisions. Like what was the average car they bought? What was the average price of a suit? Um, you know, they're married, right? They stay married, they don't get divorced, right? So, I mean, this book, I do think you have to be, let's call it a teenager to read. I think being 8 or 9 reading a research paper is a little much. Um, but if you're over 20, you have no excuse not
yeah,
to read this book. This book today is just as valuable today, if not more. I think I would say it this way, social media makes this book more valuable
yeah,
than when I was 30. Because when I was 30, I would only socialize with 20 people. Social media, you've got a lot of people with big hats, no cattle, and you
yeah.
need a way to spot them. So I love this book. It's one of my treasured books. William Danko, thank you for signing it. I will keep this forever. But yeah,
Yeah,
what are your
it's
thoughts?
one of those it's one of the books that I remember being a foundationally life-changing financial book for me to read. It's the foundation and frameworks that are in there of like the ahas that you get I mean, my dad was just like kind of the millionaire next door, like junkie car, shopped at Sears, like wore pocket protectors. It's like he was
Yeah.
the quintessential millionaire next door. And I feel like for probably 20 years, I accumulated wealth that way. And now people see like my airplane is expensive. Like I spend some money, I do things. But a lot of the things that I built are cash flowing and paying for a lot of those things that we do, the vacations that we take and things like that. So like I was for 20 years trying to accumulate and build that wealth up, and I'm not squandering it now. I'm actually trying to I was thinking about this the other day. I don't buy these things or spend this money because I'm getting a lot of hate on some of my Instagram videos about the plane right now. Like, oh yeah, let me just dip into like $3 million in my bank account and buy the plane. So, but what I've been able to do is now figure out how I take that and try to turn it into as much of an asset as possible.
Mm.
And so like making the videos on the plane and building a brand around it and also doing what I love. So like every trip that we take, making it a tax write-off and and deciding whether I'm going to spend the money on, flying myself or fly commercial. It pretty much always ends in flying myself. But it's just like I'm trying to figure out how everything that I do and use and touch can turn into some sort of an asset, even
Mhm.
if it's on paper looks like a liability. Like how do I run that through a company and not pay tax on it? How do I make it a write-off? How do I get it to cash flow? How do we make some videos that actually hopefully pay over time back to us? How do we, build an audience and a brand around it so that we can, do something for them? So I think it just gave me a mindset around everything becoming an asset versus a liability. And even when we get something nicer, how do we look at it that way as opposed to just, spending money on it?
Yeah. Millionaire Next Door is a foundational book. I agree 1000%. Again, I have it on my bookshelf for a reason. But again, Teenage Tycoon, you're changing lives, you're changing generations. Any idea on what the next book is going to be?
Yeah, the next book is The Go Giver.
Oh,
So
great choice.
yeah, so we wanted to go from something that was a little bit like longer and like more research paper, like you talked about, to be more of the fable kind of story-esque and give them more foundational principles. So they just finished Millionaire Next Door, and then this week is the start of The Go Giver. So they're reading that, I think, for first chapter or first like there's like 5 pillars in that book. So I think they're in the first pillar structure.
Yeah,
So that's a
great
great book.
choice. Oh, it
I think
is.
it's fantastic. I love it. I try to read it every year if I can.
Yeah, A Go Giver is another great book. Great choice. You're doing a great job. You want to learn more about Teenage Tycoon? There is a link below. I do encourage you to check it out. I think there's a lot of amazing things going on. I do think Teenage Tycoon is going to change generations. It gives you permission to talk about money Money was not something talked about in my household. It gives you permission to talk about entrepreneurial endeavors, which again was not talked about in my household. This is how to open up mindsets as a family. So I am so happy to be a part of just learning what's going on with Teenage Tycoon. Any closing thoughts, Bill, and we'll wrap it up?
No, I still think Thursday night at 7 p.m. Central is like my favorite time of the week. So I'm really excited about this week. Listen to Val talk about being a PAW and some of the things that she did, coming from nothing, like no money, and getting a job with me when she won the green card lottery, came to the US, $30,000 a year, basically what she was making with me in the beginning, worked her way up, and now became millionaires and they didn't even know it. So like that's the American dream right there. And you have access to that, and so do your kids. Like you don't have to be 35, 40 like me when become millionaires. They can do it when they're young. So would love to see you guys there.
Teenage Tycoon. Let's go. Thank you.